All right, today we're going to talk about absolute value in Python. Now, if you ever wondered how do I find absolute value in Python, it's actually pretty easy. This is probably something you were just wondering about or needed to find the answer to, and you just did a quick Google search. And the easy answer is to just use the ABS function. So like this right here. But there are other different ways to solve this problem, which we'll also cover. But let's start with the easy way and get into a little bit of detail about it. So I have VI open over here. I would use PyCharm, but I usually just use that for actual projects, and this is just throwaway code. So let's give it a shot. Let's just demo how we would do this. Say, so here we have a negative value, say -3, for example. Pass it to ABS and then assign that to X, and then we print out X. Pretty simple. Write this out, and now we're going to run this program. Python, let's see, test.py. And there we go. It gives us the value of 3. So we took -3, and it gives us a value of 3. That's the absolute value of 3. So that's pretty simple. Let's try another demo right here. We're going to just copy this from our document here and add this in. Paste that right in there. And this page right here is actually, this video is going to be embedded on this page after I complete putting this video together. So these kind of go together. And if you're actually looking for this page, you'll be able to find this page in the description of the video if you want to actually look at the document yourself. So here we're going to find the absolute value of 25 and -25, and we would expect those to be the exact same thing. So let's write that file, and let's run Python test again. And looks like I did not save the file. Yeah, something's wrong. And that's because I'm in the wrong directory. So get back in there, and yeah, I was running the wrong file. So let's see, Python test, and there we go. It outputs 25 and 25, so that basically gives me the absolute value. That's basically how absolute value works, and it's working exactly as we would expect it to. Nothing too exciting or crazy there. Now, one thing to note, when you run this ABS function, it doesn't actually change the value in the variable. It will return a value which you can then assign to a variable. So for example, if we assign the value -5 to X, then call ABS on X, it's not going to change X, but it will return a value that we can then assign to Y. Now let's demo how this works, just in case you're curious. I'm going to copy this. Paste it in there. Write this out, and let's run this demo again. And there we go. Original value is -5. Absolute value is 5. It's exactly how we would expect it. That's what you get when you print out X and Y, the values for X and Y. X is not going to be changed, whereas Y, the value that we return to, is actually the changed absolute value. So there we go. What's the absolute value of 0? It's just going to be 0 because that's what it is. But let's give this a shot just to see, just for fun. Now we could just use this using the Python interpreter in interactive mode, but I like to put it in a file just because it's easier to see multiple lines of code this way. I think it just looks cleaner. I mean, not everybody likes VI, but I think it's good for testing out simple things like this. So let's run this Python, and yeah, I didn't even print this out, but let's just print this just so we can actually see the results. The only way to really test. And there we go, 0, exactly as we would expect. Nothing too exciting or unexpected there. Now, let's talk about, we're going to talk about a few other things. Let's talk about variable types. Then eventually we're going to come along to FABS. This is a little bit different. We'll get to that. And then we're going to talk about absolute value without the ABS function, just how you would do it by hand. So we'll get to that. But right now, let's try, let's talk about variable types. So let's see what happens when we use a float. I'm just going to copy this little code snippet in here. Delete this. Paste it in. And so now we have a negative floating point value. So there's a number after the decimal point there. We're storing it in something called, we're calling the variable name a float. That's probably an unfortunate name for the variable, but let's stick with it. We're going to print out the absolute value, and then we're going to print out the type of the absolute value returned. So let's see what we get here. And the type is a float, so no huge surprise there. Let's try the same thing using an integer. Paste this in here, and unsurprisingly, we see the absolute value of negative 56 is 56, and the type is an integer. So finding the absolute value of an integer will return an integer value. The absolute value of a float will return a float value. Let's try with a complex number. Let's see what happens. Copy this. Paste it on in here. And yeah, so it looks like we get a float. So complex number, absolute, so that may or may not have been expected. I don't know what you may have been expecting. I actually hadn't ever given it much thought before this moment. I've never tried to take the absolute value of a complex number, but there you have it. Python will return a float value. Now let's try the FABS function. We're going to run ABS on a couple numbers, and then we're going to try the math FABS, and we're going to see what types are returned. So we have like 6 different scenarios here. So we're going to do integers, floating points, and complex numbers, and using both of these different functions. Yeah, basically the FABS function, as it says here, will also find the absolute value of a number. It will return the number as a float. If it can't return it as a float, it throws an exception. So you're always going to get a float value. Yeah, so let's give this a shot. This is probably more than you ever wanted to know about finding the absolute value in Python. Paste this in. Math is not defined, so we're going to need math. Import math. So that's the other thing about FABS. Instead of ABS, you actually have to import the math library. And let's give it a shot now. And still no good. Can't convert complex to a float. So yeah, I guess this last one is meant to fail. A complex number, I guess, cannot be returned as a float. So let's say if we comment this last line out, write it out again, and see if we can successfully run this script. And we did. Totally fine. Now this is still completely useless without adding a print. We can't actually see our output, so let's print this out. Print. And let's see what we get. And there we go. We get an integer. When we pass an integer to ABS, we get an integer type. We pass a floating point number to ABS, and we get a float. Pass a complex to ABS, we get a float. We pass an integer to FABS, and we get a float. Pass a float to FABS, we still get a float. Pass a complex number, and it just fails. We get an exception. So there we have it. That's all we have to cover for the FABS function. Now let's move on down to finding absolute value without ABS. Warning in red up here, don't do this, it's a bad idea. Just use the ABS function, it's much better. It's quicker, they probably implemented it to be more efficient, although I would imagine this should be pretty efficient too, but one way or another, this is extra code and it's ugly and it's just wrong, so don't actually do it this way in the real world. But let's give it a shot. So just in the interest of being complete and showing you everything we can. So I'm going to copy and paste my code snippet from over here. Stick it in my script. And let's run it. Well, before we run it, let's go over what it does. So we're defining a function called absolute value, and you pass a parameter x to it. So that's the one function parameter that exists. And then you say if x is less than 0, return negative x. So the opposite of x. So if it's less than 0, it's a negative number. So a negative of a negative is a positive. And if it's not that, so basically else return x. So you're always going to return a positive number, which will be the absolute value no matter what. So we're going to try running our own custom absolute value function that we defined here on a negative number, positive number, a negative, a positive, and a 0. And we'll get the results that we expect. So make sure we saved it, and let's run it right now. And there we go. We have a 25, 80. They're all basically exactly what you would expect. All positive numbers, and they all represent the absolute value of the numbers we are finding the absolute value of. So there you go. Yeah, so it's that's how you find the absolute value. And there are some actual practical real world use cases to it that you can read about here. Please do read about it. If you've watched this video, you will probably also want to click on the link in the description and visit the associated webpage. You'll want to visit my website right here, low-orbit.net. You can just type the domain in or type in this whole URL, or just click on it in the video description. And that's pretty much it. We have covered Python absolute value today. If you found this useful, like and subscribe.